Hey everyone, welcome to our next episode of Tea Talks. Today I'm joined by someone who's incredible, working for an incredible organization and doing work that really matters on the field. So many of us work in cancer care, although our audience really spreads to people working in autoimmune diseases and people just in the business of healthcare in general. But I think what Matt shares with us today is really going to resonate with so many of you who live a life of purpose and serving people at their most vulnerable. So, Matt, I'm going to actually start with asking you to introduce yourself and what you do for the American Cancer Society.
Absolutely. And thank you, Sarah, again, for letting myself and the American Cancer Society be a part of this awesome opportunity. We really appreciate it. Hello, everybody. My name is Matt Martinek. My current role at the American Cancer Society is I am the chief of staff of what we call the North Region. So you take the American Cancer Society national organization, and we split the operations of the organization up into 5 geographic regions or divisions. The North region, which I represent, is made up of 17 states, as far west as Alaska, Washington, Oregon, as far east as Michigan and Indiana, as far south as Kansas, Missouri. I'm in Kansas City, and as far north as Minnesota, Wisconsin. So a pretty large geography, and there's a team of us that work and oversee all of the operations, whether it's the mission part of the organization or the revenue, the development side of the organization, and everything that takes place there. So in a nutshell, that's what my role looks like.
Well, big job, big territory. When the layperson hears American Cancer Society, I think all of us are aware of what it stands for, who you serve. And I think when you kind of really dive deeper into being a patient with a diagnosis or being a caregiver of someone with a diagnosis, it's like it's one of the first advocacy organizations you think of. Matt, was that always the intent? And do you still see the American Cancer Society primarily serving patients, or has it now become something that does a lot more for the advocacy and even policy community?
That's a great question, Sarah. And I would say it's patients have always been at the center of what we do, right? Our vision as an organization is to end cancer as we know it for everyone, and everyone being the important term there in that particular phrase, because we know whether you're a caregiver, a patient, a donor, a volunteer. We have over 1 million volunteers that work with the organization every year. Um, Everybody is touched by cancer, and everybody in this group knows that for sure. Patient support, that's the pillar that we operate with, and which provides direct service to patients and caregivers. Yes, that is a big part of how we deliver on our mission as an organization for sure. And there are, very specific programs to help with people with access to care, to get to treatment, to stay in treatment. And a lot of that from our perspective revolves around lodging and transportation programs. Whether it's our Hope Lodge program, which we have over 30 of these facilities nationwide, which is basically free housing for patient and a caregiver who have to travel for their treatment for as long as it may take. Maybe you're there for a night, maybe you're there for 90 days because you have a blood marrow transplant that you need to go through, all free of charge. Those types of services definitely a core of what we do. And I think between that and our discovery pillar, which is our research program, are the two different pillars that most people associate the American Cancer Society with. And rightfully so. Since 1991, we've invested over $3 billion in cancer research, whether that's research we have done as an organization or part of our extramural program where we grant that out to cancer research institutions across the country. Or they don't, most folks, I shouldn't say, they recognize us for our advocacy work, which you were talking about before. And that, I would argue, is probably where it's the least known of what we do, but it probably is the biggest impact that we have is through our advocacy work. And the reason for that is we're in every state house in the country, all 50 states, at the state level, at the federal level. But as a lot of us know, law and policy is what impacts the most people and gives them access to the life-saving treatment, or more importantly, their healthcare coverage to which they have access to. So whether it was Medicaid expansion, tobacco legislation, those are the big pieces where we organizationally have made a really big impact that has had the biggest impact for the most people across the country.
Well, there's so many things that you said. I want to get to an audience question first, but then I really want to dive into something that kind of struck me when you said access to care to get to and stay in. But let's first hear from Peter. What are some of the resources for the individual patient that everyone should know about? And how is American Cancer Society funded?
Sure. Resources for the individual patient. Like I shared, we offer a portfolio of services primarily around, we call them access to care programs around lodging and transportation. And so from a lodging perspective, I talked about our Hope Lodge program. And all of this information, the easiest way to look for it is to go to our website, cancer.org. That's the best place to start. Probably one of the most trusted resources for anybody dealing with cancer. It's usually the first place most folks go when they hear of a cancer diagnosis, either for themselves or for a caregiver. So just want to put that out there for ease of how to find these things. But lodging, we also work with many different hotel partners. We have a hotel partner program in those areas where we don't have a Hope Lodge, where we either work to provide free or reduced hotel rates for cancer patients who are traveling. Transportation, we do that in a couple of different ways. We offer what we call our Road to Recovery program, which is a volunteer-based program where we have volunteers who will volunteer both their time and the use of their vehicle to drive patients back and forth to treatment. That's a program that we're re-ramping up post-pandemic, and we're trying to get that revolving again in all of our markets across the country. But we also work with health systems to provide transportation grants to where they work with their patient populations to grant out, and they have autonomy to use those transportation grants how they see fit, whether that's gas cards or paying for rideshare services or bus tickets, whatever it may be. So those are we have more programs and services for sure, but I know we got a short amount of time, but those are the primary ones that we feel are most important. We have a lot of peer-to-peer support programs as well. Cancer.org will be a great place to help folks with that.
Great. And then how is ACS funded? Is there something the audience needs to know in terms of how they can help?
You bet. We're funded. The vast majority of our funding comes through in a variety of different ways. Donations is the most simple way to put it, right? Whether that's individual giving, individual donors or philanthropists, event-based fundraising, corporate partnerships, foundation relationships, all the traditional ways in which an organization fundraises, a traditional nonprofit organization fundraises, that's where the bulk of our revenue comes from. There are a variety of grants, obviously, that we apply for, some governmental grants, but the vast majority, it comes from corporate partners, individuals, all the different mechanisms in which an organization fundraises for.
And it's so great to hear because, when you're thinking about places where your dollar matters, thinking about an organization that invested $3 billion in research since 1991, it's like you can see your dollar at work. So I really love that. But I want to get to Matt, because not only is it a hot topic, but for me, it's like a topic that's so urgent, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion. Everyone's focusing on this right now. It's long overdue. I think that there's kind of the checkbox version of DE&I, and then there's the people that are rolling up their sleeves thinking like, no, how do we really do something about it? And when you talked about access to care, get to and stay in, Erica, one of our viewers, said, the ACS has been a vital resource to my community of patients in providing transportations, which is one of our biggest barriers to care. When you look at minority representation in clinical trials and start to dissect what prevents people, nearly across the board on the top 5 is transportation issues.
Mm-hmm.
So talk a little bit about the American Cancer Society's vision for their role in diversity. and then what you're specifically doing that our audience should know, and maybe they can get involved in helping to support.
Absolutely. And thank you for asking that, Sarah. I like to think that in diversity, equity, and inclusion through the lens of health equity has been who the American Cancer Society has been from the get-go, right? I shared with you at the top, our vision is to end cancer as we know it for everyone. And we really emphasize the everyone piece of it. For at least the last 20 to 30 years, whether any major accomplishment when it came to, let's take Medicaid expansion as a big one. We do that all through the lens of health equity and making sure that everybody has equitable access to healthcare coverage or cancer treatment. The ACS was a big leader in making sure that Medicaid expansion passed at the federal level through the Affordable Care Act. And now for the past 10, 15 years has been doing that at the state level to ensure each state is trying to pass that as well. And we're getting close. I think we still have 7 more states that have to pass Medicaid expansion. But we know when it comes to cancer screening and staying up to date and tobacco cessation, those key drivers, obesity, those social determinants of health that really are the main factors in why people get diagnosed with cancer. We recognize unless people have access to healthcare coverage, a lot of those pieces will not change. And a lot of those issues, like you were talking about, those disparities happen with our minority populations.
Yeah.
And we know that is where the biggest need exists. So everything we do, all the programming that we provide, research that we invest in, legislative policies that we advocate for, all are under the umbrella of health equity and reducing cancer disparities.
It's there's such an unmet need, and it's such a huge problem, meaning this is a generational problem. This is a problem that needs like a multifactorial strategy. And you see at all these levels, pharma, clinic level, policy level, advocacy level, even in education. At Total Health, we recently launched the Cancer Equity Project, a nonprofit that uses education, because it's almost like you got to look at your core skill set and say, like, how do I apply this? Otherwise, you get lost because there is so much need. And we believe education is power. If you have an informed patient, an educated patient, you have a powerful patient, because they can ask the questions, where do I get this resource? Or why didn't you offer this to me? Or something so simple as, I heard that young Black women like me are diagnosed with breast cancer earlier, with more aggressive disease, and we die at a doubling rate. I mean, that sentence alone puts the urgency on your physician or your care team to say, oh yeah, so we've got to seek you out and seek out your barriers differently. How do you work with community partners, Matt, on helping, using the power of the American Cancer Society to help where they are, help communities that they serve?
Absolutely. And this, Sarah, would look different from state to state because, as we all know, states look different in major markets and how that breaks up. But I mentioned we have what we call our patient support pillar, right? That's the arm or the pillar of the organization that does a lot of our patient support delivery, if you will. And those folks have a variety of different roles. But one of those roles focuses primarily on whether it's at the state level, state-based relationships with the State Cancer Coalition. Every state has funding from the CDC to do a state cancer coalition. But a lot of that work then funnels into work at a city level or at a market level. And we have staff in a variety of different markets that work to build, you mentioned African-American women and breast cancer screening and mortality rates. That's a whole other conversation for another day too, but there is obviously a lot of work that we need to do there. But it isn't uncommon for us to be involved, whether part of a coalition or leading a coalition, funding what we call change grants to help with local federally qualified health centers to increase cancer screening within those populations that need access. our work can look a variety of different ways based on what the community's needs are in that particular geography. So go ahead. I didn't want to.
No, it's so far reaching. I mean,
Yep.
really, I know that the ACS knows how big the task is, and you all kind of wear these Superman capes to say, like, we can do it, which is so wonderful because it's really a benchmark for the rest of us to say, well, if they can do it, we can do it. You know, we can find ways to kind of partner and reach these populations. When you said the vision of the American Cancer Society is for every patient and cancer for everyone, I was watching a talk this morning on DE&I, and it kind of strikes you, at least it struck me. It showed these disparities between the Black and Hispanic communities, and then kind of white community being the control arm.
Mm-hmm.
So there were all these circles on the disparities. And so you had like the Asian population and then the Native American Pacific Islander population. And Matt, I couldn't believe in so many of the slides, the Native people groups disparities was so much greater than even Black or Hispanic. And I want to invite you to speak to that there are populations of people that, because they don't represent so many in terms of the census, but they're going invisible, even on the slide decks that we're using to try to prove a point in disparities. I just want you to speak to how the American Cancer Society seeks to see so many diverse populations and not just Black, brown, and white.
You're exactly right, Sarah. And how we do that, we're a scientific organization. The data, we rely on what the data tells us and what we do. Now, and I'm gonna take a longer way to get there, but I promise I'm gonna get to your original question. Sometimes because of that, because what we do, guidelines, what we invest in research-wise, is all based on what the science is telling us and what the data is telling us. Sometimes our reaction to things can take longer because of that, right? Especially from a legislative perspective, because I'll give you a really good example, and I will get off this tangent, but when e-cigarettes first started coming out and folks really wanted us to take a hard stand as against them. Well, clearly we knew that there was an issue there, but there wasn't enough science in the moment to tell us, hey, this is really bad for you, because there were instances where use of e-cigarettes could help with smoking cessation and help people back off of what they were doing. So an example there, but reinforcing the fact that the data is what shows us. And so when we talk about eliminating cancer everywhere for everyone, we look at the data to help us figure that out. And especially when you're talking about Native populations, we have a long history of working with Native American tribes across the country on a variety of different projects, whether that's research projects, whether that was grants to help them with all of the things we talked about from an access perspective, because you're right, those challenges are even more difficult. Difficult's not the right word, but more complex than everything else we've talked about as well. One in particular that we're working on right now is, as you would imagine, access to care in Alaska for Native Alaskans is a completely different ballgame than access to care would be for somebody in Kansas City.
Yeah.
That's a particular area where we're diving into, where, like you said, that probably doesn't show up on your traditional slide of these are the disparities that exist within cancer across the country. But if you're a Native Alaskan and you're living up there and you know that the easiest way to get treatment is a 4-hour plane ride to someplace, and the need is just completely different. So
yeah. It's really, I love that you are seeing everyone everywhere, because I think that as these kind of grassroots advocacy organizations and even more developed advocacy organizations seek to, throw their hat into areas where they think they can help, there really are completely invisible populations. So it just makes you feel good that someone is out there doing substantive work with these groups. Okay, I'm gonna pull up our mutual friend who we both love so much, Sammy Mansfield. She says, I know the American Cancer Society does a lot for caregivers. Can you expand on some specifics for the audience? Matt, this is huge for us. You know, when you're a person who's been diagnosed with a cancer, your world turns upside down, but so does the world of the people around you. And in so many ways, you, the patient, lose that sense of control, that sense of decision-making ability. And so a lot of the burden falls on the caregiver without the caregiver necessarily being focused on as a person who's experiencing that same or a similar trauma. So I know Sammy probably is asking this because she knows the answer, but we really want to get it to our audience.
Sure.
What does ACS provide for caregivers, and can it be found as simply as going to cancer.org?
The quick answer is yes. That is where I would tell folks, and there's a whole caregiver section on the website with a variety of resources. But before I get into some of those details, Sarah, I thought in the pre-show we talked about not taking questions from Sammy. Was that not what we agreed on? But
we did, but she's Venmo'd me a couple bucks, so I had to.
That's totally fair. So yes, that would be the basic piece of where there is. And you mentioned it earlier about educating the patient, and an educated patient is just a stronger patient, much more equipped. I would 100% agree with that. And I would say even probably a little bit more importantly is that person's caregiver is educated, and that person's caregiver is their advocate, because oftentimes we hear it all the time, right? Especially when that diagnosis first comes in, when you're the person diagnosed, like you just kind of shut down, like your brain is just trying to process what in the world does this mean? And we often hear people say, I don't know what I don't know. Like, I don't even know where to get started, or what are the questions I should be asking, or much less all of these terms that I've never heard of in my life, and what this means, and how quickly the caregiver and the patient become experts in oncology, right? Like they can start rattling off of, this is what my blood count was, this is what this result was, or whatever it may be. So what we, from a caregiver perspective, and I'll just kind of focus on two for you, education is the biggest thing, right? Cancer.org is really what is there to help folks navigate through and help them figure out what is it you do need to know when you're like, I don't know what I don't know. A second resource that we provide is our National Cancer Information Center, which is our 800 number, or through most folks go through it through cancer.org right now too, but that's where we have staff on site 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, that answer any question that you have about cancer, and can get you connected to a variety of resources, not just ACS resources. We keep a large, elaborate database of but resources that exist in communities all across the country that we want to get folks connected to, especially the things that we don't offer as an organization, that we want them to be there. So that's two. The third one I would add, and I mentioned our Hope Lodges earlier, and on the surface, everybody thinks of that as a lodging resource, which it absolutely is. But the really, really cool thing about our Hope Lodges is they truly are communities for cancer patients and their caregivers. And here in Kansas City, we have a Hope Lodge that has been here for 20 years. And the greatest thing about that lodge is the relationships that get built among the patients that are there and the caregivers that are there with others, because you are truly with a group of people who are going through exactly what you're going through. It's not family members that you have to try to explain it to. It's not friends who, want to help but just don't know how. You are truly in the trenches with folks that are going through the exact same thing. And so, although that is a great lodging resource, it is equally a great resource for caregivers, because oftentimes that's where caregivers come together to lean on one another in what is often the darkest time that they and their family are going through. So
well, thank you. Thank you for the work that you do at ACS. I know I was in Puerto Rico years ago, and someone said, oh, let's go to the Hope Lodge. And I went there, and I mean, talk about a moving experience, because everything you said is 100% real. I mean, everything, there was care and consideration given to every element and aspect. And it really was like a building of capability over time, because you recognized someone needed a prayer mat. You recognized someone needed specific dietary. you know, it was such a moving experience because you do feel cradled in that lodge in a way that you probably don't anywhere else. So I just really applaud the work that you continue to do at the American Cancer Society. Matt, we call this short cast T Talks because we know T cells promote health and life giving fighting resources for bodies. We always love to end on a positive note. It could be a personal positive note, it could be what drives you to do what you do. But we always invite our guests to leave us with one positive thing so that we all can take it into our day. So I ask you to do that to close us out.
Yeah, my positive thing would be my parents were just in town visiting. I'm originally from Wisconsin, so they were in town for the weekend visiting. I've got two teenagers, and they surprised my two teenagers by bringing my niece and nephew down for the weekend, which they're very close. And to see the excitement that came with them being together, because they see each other maybe 3-4 times a year. Technology is great because they can stay connected that way. But the joy that came with family being together, you really can't substitute that. It was a really great weekend. So whenever you get to spend some time with the family, make the most of it.
Make the most of it. That's right. Always prioritize the things that bring you joy, even if it means saying, okay, in fact, here on cue, my little guy comes into my office every day when he gets picked up from school.
That's awesome.
This is Matt from the American Cancer Society. This is my little Joseph.
Hi, Joseph. How you doing, bud?
And he became a black belt yesterday in Taekwondo.
Joseph.
So guys, to our audience, that's a double T Talk T cell stimulation. Matt, I thank you so much. I hope you come back to talk to us. There's so many questions about initiatives and the types of cancers where there's the most progress. And I just feel like if you could come back with us one day soon, we can dive into some of those unanswered questions and take it from there.
Would love to, Sarah. Thank you so much for the opportunity. It was great to meet you and Joseph. Thanks again there, buddy. That's good stuff.
Thank you again, Matt, so much.